Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in this brand new webinar on the art of insighting. My name is Natalie and I will be your host the next 60 minutes. Before we start with the presentation, let me first quickly introduce the presenters to you. They are both business director here at Insights Consulting, Ashley and Martijn, but they will introduce themselves later on as well. It's also important to mention that when you have questions during the session, you can ask them in the community chat on the left, and then afterwards we are happy to answer them for you. So I think we are ready to kick off. So Ashley and Martijn, if you are ready, you can take over from here. Good luck.
Okay, great. Thank you, Natalie. And I would say a big good afternoon to everybody from Belgium, where we're actually situated now. And I guess for most people it's also afternoon, although we may have some people in different time zones. So welcome to everybody. Today's webinar, indeed the art of insighting. We have designed this webinar to introduce a virtuous approach to generating and activating insights. So basically we want to touch a little bit on theory of insights, but we don't want to spend too much time on that because it has been the subject of previous webinars. But during the next hour, we're going to more focus on actually how you can efficiently mine for insights, and then very importantly, how can you activate those insights to extract the maximum value from them for your business. So first of all, a little introduction from me. There's me, obviously, and my family. Two things about me maybe to call out. One is that I am a displaced Australian in Europe, living in Europe. And secondly, my main passion within this sector is on insighting and innovation. So both in terms of actual research projects, but secondly, running a lot of workshops connected to innovation and insighting, which often links also research steps. My colleague joining me today, or my partner in crime, is Martijn Van Bijnen. He resides or comes from Tilburg in the Netherlands, and this is actually one of the well-known carnival towns where carnival is celebrated very strongly. And here you see on the left is Martijn putting on his carnival face for you. This is not his normal everyday look, but he's a very passionate researcher as well, Martijn. His particular area he spends a lot of time on is on Generation Y, but also a lot of immersion projects with clients. So the two of us decided that, well, if we're going to talk about consumer insighting today, then why not share an insight about us? And the funny thing is that when we wrote our insights, we actually saw that they were almost the same, believe it or not. So here's to give you more insight into us. Here's one that which describes us a little bit, or issues that we had in our own lives. Maybe you recognize yourself in this. But we're very happy to say that we, of course, have found solutions to our problems in recent years. And both Martijn and I are, let's say, enthusiastic subscribers to these new services which solve our consumer needs. So that's a little bit to get to know us better. Let's turn to what we want to give to you today. We tried to summarize a bit why we're doing this webinar. We realized that as a company we do an awful lot of insight generation projects, and we're learning a lot of things through these. And there's a lot of learnings that we can share back to you. We do recognize that today will be a lot of data, well, let's say a lot of tips, a lot of suggestions. So we want this to be the start of a discussion that continues on, and we would like to have your feedback, but also any issues that you think you want advice from us. We'd like to continue the conversation. Insight generation is an art, and today we're going to give some tools and suggestions on helping to make it even more of an art form in your business or company. But as I mentioned, this is a kind of a sequel, you could call it, to a webinar that we conducted in the last year. Maybe some of you joined from AHA to Eureka, which was a previous seminar, which was really then a lot about insight theory. We'd like to take the assumption that most of you today are already convinced about the value of consumer insights to your business, about the need to, let's say, discover them, embed them, into innovations and so forth. But having said that, we still think that a little bit of back to school, also for new people to our webinars, wouldn't go astray. So let's do that. Let's put on our school bag and go a little bit back to Insight School. Let's start about a definition of what is an insight. Now, we are the first to recognize that in the industry and within companies, there are many different definitions. It's difficult to find a common definition. So we will focus the next section on our definition of what we think a good consumer or a good customer insight is. Having said that, we would hope that the holistic steps that we're going to talk about for insighting in your business, whatever your definition of an insight is, that you use it within that context. We don't want to get into definition debates today, but we still think it's important to present our vision on a great consumer insight. So the best way to describe this is usually about what is an insight not. And I think the first and fundamental belief we have here is that, especially now in the age of big data and lots of data, is that it's something that goes beyond this data. We need to go beyond observations. To have great insights, we need to clearly understand actual motivations and emotions behind these data and observations. We need to get to unmet needs, aspirations, or even frictions that the consumer is motivated to have solved. The second point is that we don't believe that one insight equals one idea. In other words, that it can only be used once. We believe that great insights are actually the mother or father of very many ideas, either for innovation or for branding or for communication. I think a recent example we can give here, of course, you're all probably familiar with the Real Beauty campaign of Dove, based on an insight that women are beautiful, no matter what they look like. So this was, of course, in 2005, very, very visible, and it was executed in a way, as you can see a little bit on the left, through lots of campaign material. They are now using the same insight in 2013 in a slightly different way. On the right-hand side, you see an exercise done with a sketch artist where one of the, let's say, ladies in question, a target consumer for Dove, described to a sketch artist how they believed they looked. And the drawing on the left is the result of that. The drawing on the right is how an independent observer of that particular lady described it to the sketch artist, and that's how the sketch artist sketched a more objective view of the lady. As you can see, the pictures differ. And it was another great way to actually activate the same insight. So again, demonstrating the point that not one insight should lead to only one idea. So at Insights Consulting, we, like everybody else, have developed an insight formula, what we think is a great insight to different components. So we'll touch briefly on a couple of those now. I think the first one is fairly obvious to most people. A great insight has to achieve identification with your consumer or customer or your target group. It's something that they have to look at and say, yeah, I recognize that in me. It's true. I recognize this. And even going beyond that, certain insights, I recognize this in my peers, in my target, in let's say people that I share common values and beliefs with. So they must identify with the insight. It must be true to them. That's very important. Second aspect of a great insight is the analogy we use with a refrigerator. So as you know, when you open a refrigerator, normally, if it's working correctly, a little light pops on in the refrigerator. And we think this is a bit like the process that goes on in a brain when you get, let's say, confronted with a consumer insight as a consumer. When you hear it, it's like a little light goes on when you say, bang, okay, wow, that is true. You're very correct. And actually, I had not really thought of that before. It's almost like a revelation to you as well, but still true. We often call this the idea of fresh insights, something which is a fresh but true consumer need or aspiration. Another, or let's say the third big ingredient here is it's all good and proper to find unmet needs, frictions, etc. But the consumer needs, for a good insight, a consumer needs to have the motivation to find a solution for this. It needs to be a strong enough friction or strong enough issue that they want to see a solution. And that's something we should also measure or take into account as part of a great insight. So we're going to have a little quiz now. It's not a difficult quiz, but it'd be like to recap a little bit on what we've discussed so far. So on your screen, you'll see now statement, and I'd like you to you can tap in or type into the bottom left on your screen. Just tell me if you think it's just type A or B or C, if you think this is either a hypothesis, observation, or a consumer insight. I am drowning in a sea of B's at this present time. Okay, we have some diversion in the group. That's great. That's great. Yeah. Okay. I can tell you indeed that we believe this is an observation. So what is in this statement is maybe the beginning of an insight, but actually what we are missing is we have no idea of motivations or emotions or explaining behavior behind this actual trend. So we call this an observation only. The next statement, please take a moment to read that and again indicate whether you think it's A, B, or C. Okay, now the A camp is emerging. It's a wisdom of the crowds exercise here. And I can tell you the crowd is quite wise on this instance. So we would call this a hypothesis. You can see that the next level has happened here in terms of, let's say, maybe a client or yourselves analyzing that observation, and you are putting a hypothesis behind the motivation to try and explain why that particular trend is happening. This is a great step and a necessary step, but actually we're not there yet. We haven't got to the point where we have a well-formulated insight which reflects the ambition of the consumer. Final statement, let's have a look at this, and please indicate which of the three options below you think it is. Okay, we're getting some mixed. Yeah. I actually did try to fool you a little bit to see that you're awake by changing the answer options. So actually the correct answer in this one is A. It is an insight, or close to what we would say is a good consumer insight. Why is this different from the previous two? We really have a statement now which reads as if it came off the tongue of a consumer, as if they really express this themselves in their own language. It expresses a situation. It expresses a context, expresses an issue and a motivation behind the issue, and also expresses a kind of a end state that the consumer would like to have. So thanks for playing the game, but it was just meant to, let's say, recap some of the theory we had discussed. Now, the school is nearly over and we can move on to the main theme of our topic today, but I think this is the beginning. Having an insight is the beginning, and this is what we want to really stress today, is that the insight should find its way into so many different aspects of your business. The most obvious way that you're all familiar with is a great consumer or customer insight is the DNA of your product or product innovations. Dyson is a great example here where the insight, where consumers actually want to see the dirt when they're vacuuming as opposed to it being invisibly hidden in bags, is the foundation of much of their innovation in vacuum cleaning. And of course it's built on an actual emotional need that consumers want to actually be, let's say, emotionally assured that the cleaning is doing its job, because cleaning is a very emotional issue for people. So this is a way that insights find their way into products. The second aspect is that an insight should also find its way eventually into the actual touch points surrounding products and services. So many, let's say, working on an insight of keeping things playful and individual and breaking the mold a little bit, and the need to do this, all of their communication and activation tends to also reinforce this in the having the insight live on in that. So we also believe strongly that the insight should find its way into every touch point. So as you can see, there's many different ways to discover new insights, but what we want to stress here is that it's not an on-off switch. And insighting should remain an always-on activity in your business. It's not something we dive into for a month and then forget about for 2 or 3 months. We want it to become more of a, let's say, a habit, almost an addiction within your business to be continuously insighting. And also related to that, we also believe that it's not necessarily the domain of only a couple of, let's say, functions within a company. Everybody, anywhere, anytime, can be a valid contributor to developing insights. And we touched on this more in a moment. So, it wouldn't be a marketing research agency webinar or presentation without a model. So, of course, today we have brought to you a model. We call it our virtuous circle of insighting, made of 5 different pillars, which we will go into depth in a minute. But you might say to me, Ashley, what's this virtuous inciting circle about? Well, the first thing I would call out is a bit the definition of virtuous. So actually, if you take a strict look at the dictionary definition of virtuous, it really relates to high moral standards or excellent moral standards. But it gets interesting if you look at the synonyms around virtuous, is you see that actually some of these, excellent, worthy, exemplary, high-principled, etc., can also describe a great business, let's say, discipline or process. Therefore, we wanted to think about the virtuous circle of insighting being exemplary, pure, excellent, and high-principled. The circle itself, you can argue, could be sequential. So you could follow these steps 1 to 5 in a sequential order, and that would definitely make sense. But we don't want that to be the only message. Of course, any of these steps could take place at any time, independent of each other, could be independent of categories or cross-categories, but they're very important steps that our message is they should all be considered. Briefly, before we go into detail, bottom-up listening, number 1, is all about the things we do to make sure that insights can basically come to us in even an unstructured way, a way that we're actually hearing consumers, listening to consumers, looking at what consumers are already talking about to extract very interesting insights in a bottom-up way. Taking stock, number 2, is a bit as it's described. It's about how often do we actually check in an organization what do we already know and what do we not know, and take appropriate steps in planning based on that on an insight level. Step 3 is the one that you're probably most familiar with as an audience, is when we do ad hoc insight generation projects for a particular category, for a particular brand, for a particular business issue. But again, it's a part of this, let's say, this model. Pillar 4 is insight validation. A step which is not always taken but important is, of course, at some point in time you have to make choices from all the insights you've developed through either 1, 2, or 3 steps here. You have to make some choices about which ones you think are most potent for your business to use. And finally, insight activation, last but by no means the least important. What do we do once we've got great, validated, and chosen insights? How do we make sure that we actually activate them so we get the very best out of them in our business? And that's what section 5 will cover. Before we dive into the 5 sections, just a word that each of the steps we outline may not generate for you a completely polished, finished consumer insight like we have just discovered in the, let's say, the theory section. However, they may definitely suggest the starting points of an insight. So some of the tools and tricks may get you great observations or even great hypotheses that can form the basis of an insight later. But it may not be that an action delivers with you a very, let's say, finished consumer insight. All right, now we're going to dive into the 5 sections. Section 1, Martijn will take over and talk you through bottom-up listening.
All right, thank you, Ashley, and good afternoon, good morning, or good evening to all of you. Indeed, I will be talking about bottom-up listening, but let me first start with a, let's say, definition of what we mean with bottom-up listening. And actually what we mean is all the tools and all the processes that can be utilized to capture what we call unsolicited discussions and observations. And why do we want to listen bottom-up? Basically because consumer insights are often relatively hidden. They are often latent. They are difficult to capture with more traditional question response-like methods, which is actually why we often start the process of insight generation by merely listening and observing. And ideally we do that in an ongoing mode. An ideal way of actually capturing this unsolicited consumer input is through the use of structural communities with consumers or with other research participants. Like I said, this is actually often at the core of all the insight generation projects that we do, and you are most likely aware of the method. Here's actually an example of such a community. And as you can see, the most important part we would like to discuss here is actually the social corner. That's actually in the middle section of the screen. It's the part where consumers can get together, can discuss in a more organic way the things that are important to them. Theoretically, it can cover everything. They can discuss their weekend plans, but we often learn that in this process, people are very on topic. They talk about very category-specific stuff. And there's a lot of insight potential in this organic discussions. A further interesting element here is that by allowing consumers to have free organic discussions, they also get a sense of additional ownership. They want to be involved and they want to be part of the total project team. To explain it a bit more, as you are most likely aware of Research Community as a research tool, this is actually a potential scheme of a structural research community project, where we of course do not bombard our research participants with topics and exercises each single day. No, instead we focus around key strategic themes throughout the total time frame of the project, as indicated here by the green blocks. We often also have 48-hour topics along the way that are more aimed at tactical executions. But the most important part here, and actually that's the bottom-up listening part, is actually the red blocks, or represented by the red blocks. The bottom-up listening part, which is theoretically always on. This is actually a cool example of a structural community. It's the Danone Yogurt Talk, which is actually already on air for 6 months in the Netherlands, and it's actually also launched, I think even this week, in Belgium as well. It's a continuous community, it's structural, and there is a lot of activity in the lounge, which you can see on the left bottom. Very important to understand is that bottom-up listening, or capturing unsolicited feedback, is not typically restricted to qualitative methodologies only. You can only also include these options in quantitative surveys as well. And this is actually a case where we, for Cloetta, a chocolate manufacturer company, where we included a post-survey lounge exercise where participants could upload pictures, well, discuss topics, etc., at the end of a more traditional quantitative survey. And one of the insights found was actually an insight that was not uncovered in the more traditional research setup, and it was actually the discovery, or let's say the insight, that very often when contained in a refrigerator, chocolate tends to get a little bit white, and it gets a bit ugly then. For now, we have focused primarily on using consumers as input for bottom-up listening. And that's not the, of course, predominantly we work with consumers, but actually we can discuss, or we can listen bottom-up to a wide variety of stakeholders. It can be B2B clients, but it can even be frontline employees or other internal stakeholders. For KBC, a leading Belgian bank, we used this approach when we were facing a relatively sensitive topic, actually the topic of intergenerational money transferring, which we felt was a bit too sensitive to discuss in an open discussion with end consumers. So we invited frontline employees, being the eyes and ears of the company and having a lot of direct contact with these end consumers, to basically serve as representatives of the end consumers. And that's actually a, let's say, question to provoke a little here, is that when was the last time that you involved customer service agents in a insight generation project? And when was the last time that you asked them to present their insights, knowing that they are, in fact, perhaps the group within the company that has the most direct contact with end consumers? All right, the last tool in the toolbox for bottom-up listening is actually not related to a strict community, let's say, or even a, let's say, research project with strict boundaries. It actually involves social media listening. It's listening to what is already being said, even outside the scope of a specific research project. And that was actually, this is actually showing a case where we analyzed a lot of already existing information and discussions around the concept of aging, where we in fact uncovered a lot of new and fresh insights around how older people, or let's say elderly people, are dealing with stuff like food or insurances, etc. So there we didn't, let's say, invite these people to a closed platform. No, we listened to what was already there. And perhaps to summarize before I hand over to Ashley again, this part, to optimize the output of an insight generation project, it is very important to start broad and not immediately go into the standard Q&A like questions or exercises, but instead listen to and observe consumers in a more organic way. You can use research communities with consumers or even with internal stakeholders for this, or use social media netnography. Sorry about that. Ashley.
Thank you, Martijn. Let's move on to our second pillar of the virtuous circle. It's taking stock. And this is pretty much as it's described. It's about understanding the things that we know and the things that we don't actually know in a company. But let's first frame it in terms of a kind of a challenge that's faced here. We uncover with clients many instances where companies have not necessarily a great idea about all that they know already, and they can actually be sitting on an enormous amount of, let's say, data or observations or even previously tested and proven insights across different business sections, different organizations or geographic regions. Very often the idea of you don't know what you don't know is quite true. So I would like to even again ask another provocative question is, how often as an organization do you in your category or your team or your discipline, how often do you actually sit together and review the insight knowledge that you have in your business? We find that more and more we're being asked by customers to help us with this and to help them with this. And one of the key tools that we actually do here is a workshop type environment. So we call it connecting the dots. And yeah, I'm just checking that everyone can hear okay. Yeah. Okay, I think everybody can hear. All right, great. I'll continue then. So connecting the dots workshop is an example of taking stock here, of looking at an organization at the insights that, what do we know and what do we not know? By essentially doing several things. Let's first look at all the research that exists in the organization and the insights that already exist. Bring them into this workshop and let key stakeholders be reminded of that. And understand based on that what we actually know, but most importantly what we don't know. We call them IWICs. As I said, they're not very furry little creatures from Star Wars movies, but the I wish I knews, the things that we would like to investigate further. We can develop in the workshop hypothesis on insights, and then we most importantly say which of these do we have evidence for from previous research, from previous knowledge, which ones do we not. Most importantly, the output of such an activity or a workshop is three things. You end up with a reminder or let's say a rediscovery of insights that already exist that you can use again for your business issue or problem. Second thing is you end up with insights which we would say are to be finished. So there might already be a good observation, good hypothesis, but there needs to be some work to finish them off and confirm them and polish them. And thirdly, you end up with actually what we call insight white spaces, so areas where you have very little research or evidence, and you need to, as a result, actually then go out and close those white spaces. Related to this, and to support such an activity, such as a Connecting the Dots workshop, we've also developed the idea that there are lots of people who would like to be in such a workshop, but just can't for various reasons, for geography reasons, for agenda reasons. But we want to mine the knowledge that's in your company. People who in any discipline may have fantastic reports, research, they may have access to great consumer data. Why not invite them through an online portal before such a workshop to contribute and upload their hypothesis, their data that they believe is relevant, or even old insights. We did this with Telefonica in an R&D project, and it was extremely successful. Another reason such a portal or tool would be useful is that maybe even people for, let's say, hierarchical reasons don't feel confident enough to contribute data or contribute insights or to such a project, incitement project. This gives them a kind of a nice platform to be able to feel confident to do that. A final way to kind of take stock is often also looking at great research that was previously done. Often in consumer immersion or consumer incitement projects, we do a lot of ethnography, getting close to the consumer, collecting visuals and stories from them about how they use your product or service. And this is just an example of a tool that we have and that we use quite a lot, is a way to go back to those old pictures and images and sort them in a logical way by brand or by user, by participant, by question, and be able to rediscover that data for future purposes. You see in the bottom right that each of the pictures comes with its backstory as well. In other words, what did the respondent at the time give to explain their picture, why they uploaded it. So again, it's about recycling, taking stock of information that you have to see what insights are already there or insights you can start to build. So I think just before we go on to Module 3, the main message here in this section is that there's a lot of things that you will already know in your company, of course, and things that you need to investigate. And such an action, this taking stock action, be it through a workshop or through some kind of online discussion, it's really important because one of the risks is that companies just go and keep researching again the same things or are really not fully aware of where the real white spots are from an insighting point of view. Okay, Pillar 3 is back to Martijn.
All right, thanks, Ashley. And before I start, I did notice a question popping up during my section. I think it was Jesslyn who mentioned it, where she asked for more information on the insight of how elderly people are dealing with food. Actually, we wrote an award-winning paper on netnography. I will make sure that that paper will come your way, and if you have any further questions, we can discuss that at a later stage. But to focus now on phase 3, the ad hoc generation. And as Ashley already indicated before, this is most likely the part of the process of the 5 pillars that you're most, let's say, familiar with. And chances are that you are adopting quite some of the techniques and principles that we will be sharing in the next sheets. But let me quickly go through them in the next couple of minutes. Very important in this phase, and actually a very important pitfall, is, let's say, the challenge to cover all insights, and with the main pitfall being to focus only on the obvious insights, forgetting to take other perspective to think outside the box as well, which is actually the reason why we created this quadrant using the in the box and out the box dimension and the portrait versus landscape dimension, which is more related to close to consumer versus taking a more broader perspective. All right. The classic approach is actually the on the couch approach, a bit similar to the psychologist sofa, with one big difference actually. An important distinction is that we don't want consumers to just tell about their experiences, but we also want to live their experience, to really immerse in their lives and to feel their heartbeat. And actually the Internet of Things is actually allowing us to do just that. Here's an example of how we immersed in the target audience world. It was a project done for Quinny, where we dealt with the issue of urban parents and mobility challenges. And it's a project where we used a lot of photo material. Again, we used a research community approach for the project. 120 urban parents were invited from 7 cities all over the world. They discussed and they uploaded and they generated topics themselves for over 3 weeks, ultimately resulting in close to 3,000 posts. Very rich indeed. And actually, a lot of those posts were not just text only, but were picture and text only. And pivotal to the success of this Quinny project was actually a mobile app. Well, actually, it was a dual screen app, meaning that members could use both their mobile application as well as their desktop application to upload pictures and to basically communicate with us through the community platform. We did a small R&D project on the matter, and we learned a couple of great new things. First of all, that mobile users, or actually the people who use the mobile app in addition to the desktop app, were more engaged, contributing 65% more posts. But that was not just it. We also learned that the contributions that they made contained twice as many visuals when compared to the traditional desktop-only approach. Often because they were just in the moment. They could upload their pictures when they want, and most of all, when it was relevant. Alright, so let's move on to the second quadrant, the ticket around the world. Meaning that sometimes it's good to take one step back and look at the same behavior from a different angle to really find new insights. And actually that's something we often do with clients, and actually it's something often included in intermediate workshops, which we are doing much more often than previous, because let's say the nature of a research community allows us to build on consecutive learning along the way. It's not just a briefing and a debrief, but there are intermediate debriefs as well. We often use gamification techniques. Here is just one example, a game that we have created for well, challenging internal stakeholders to think from different perspectives. For example, adopt a persona that was created in the research and really think about their behavior and their actions from that persona perspective. We often do not only ask clients to interpret behavior. No, we often even include crowd interpretation, meaning that we are confronting research participants with behavior and input from other research participants and ask them to basically sit on our chair for a minute to interpret their behavior, and allowing for different perspectives, allowing for crowd interpretation in addition to research interpretation. We learn a lot of new insights. An R&D project created for this project learned that we got 20 to 30% additional insights from this method. Moving on to the third quadrant, it's the out of the comfort zone quadrant. And actually one of the key methods here is one of my personal favorites, and it's called the activation deprivation exercise. What we are doing there is actually not asking for participants to tell us about their current or their actual behavior. No, we instead force them, or forcing sounds a bit aggressive, but we ask them to change their behavior. So this was actually a project done in the context of fruit. We sent fruit baskets to people who did not eat fruit regularly, and we asked people who were fierce fruit eaters to stop or at least decrease the amount of fruit eaten. And actually we learned a lot, and one of the main learnings is that actually when changing the original behaviors of their original behaviors, a lot of consumers were more aware of their original motivations behind the original behavior. All right. So the last of the 4 quadrants is actually the Mars exploration. So taking a, let's say, a relatively distant approach and also out of the box. And we want to share one method here as well before I hand over to Ashley again. This is a exercise that we included in a Smirnoff case. It's actually almost asking community participants to act as researchers. We gave them detective missions where we asked them to look for inspiring content on different Facebook fan pages. Anything they can think of, basically. And the result was that we got information from completely different sources that we perhaps would have normally not have looked at ourselves. Again, leading to new insights. By the way, this is also a very nice way to engage a Gen Y or Gen Z audience because they are a research audience that is increasingly getting bored with the more traditional question and response techniques. So before I hand over to Ashley, again, let me recap. In ad hoc insight generation projects, it's very important that you go beyond the mere question response like methods, really go broad in terms of context included, perspectives taken, as otherwise you'll easily end up in the classic if I'd asked consumers what they wanted, they said a faster horse example.
Thank you, Martijn. So, moving on to our 4th pillar of the virtuous circle, insight validation. This is actually a step we find is not always taken by companies. We believe it's an important step. We believe it's a necessary step. In other words, just once you've discovered new insights, choosing which ones you're going to select to act upon. Now, there's various reasons why we think a validation step is important in inciting. One of them is to do with, of course, innovation. Is that in most companies, innovation dollars are not limitless. We cannot spend everything on every insight. So some kind of prioritization of insights has to be made at this point to decide which innovation dollars we will throw against making new products or services. Another aspect of choosing insights or validating insights is that maybe the actual insight itself is not or certain insights are not a great fit with your brand or your brand DNA or your strategy. So we need to kind of make a sense check to see here, okay, if we're going to select certain insights to pursue, are these the ones which best fit our brand, our strategy, and our ability even to activate these insights? One very broad example could be that we may uncover a great insight to do with consumers seeking a very completely pure, natural and healthy drinking or eating option, whereas the brand in question in its DNA might be completely about indulgence, completely about treating themselves and indulgence, and the conclusion might be that insight, whilst true with consumers, may not be the best one for that company to pursue in terms of the fit. At Insights Consulting, we, of course, have developed a model to validate insights. You will notice that many of these, let's say, key ingredients relate to the ingredients we introduced earlier in the webinar about our insight theory. So, indeed, we have a quantitative way to measure which are the stronger insights from the weaker insights from that point of view. But we also recognize that in many cases, particularly in validation stages, that it's important for clients and stakeholders to really understand the validation. We want to go beyond just green lights and red lights because quite often those results are not fully understood. In other words, why did an insight that we were all very excited about not do so well? Or the flip side to that, why is something that was suddenly testing much better than what we thought? So our idea was to have quantitative validation of insights, but have it with combined understanding to make it a little bit more, delivering more value in terms of a method. And here we did actually partner with Leaf Cloetta, which is a confectionery manufacturer operating in Northern Europe mostly, to help them with Insight Validation Plus, as we called it, to give added value to that process. Because typically when we go to validate our insights, we do end up with lots of green lights and red lights and scores, which are absolutely useful and often very, very clear outcomes about what is powerful and what is not. But there can also be a need to understand on a deeper level the whys behind those results when we go to validate insights. And one very, very concrete way we wanted to add value here was that, for example, where we ask whether consumers identify with insights or the relevance, we wanted to explore about whether other consumers in the actual research, in the quantitative research, could help us understand this. What did we do? This is an example of, let's say, a question on identification in a quantitative survey. We would confront or show these results based on the research going on to the participants. Then we ask them to explain the outcome. So, for example, if we have an insight which is achieving quite a low level of identification, we ask the group to explain that to us. Why would we do that? Because quite often consumers themselves may not be able to admit or that they agree to certain insights, or there may be social taboos involved. The group, when looking at this outcome, can help us understand and explain that. So this is adding much more value to reporting out on insight validation, being able to give people a good understanding of the why there. In addition to this, during these validation rounds, it's another opportunity to collect more contextual proof and contextual information. So as an additional task to this survey, we ask people for a particular insight that they identified with, tell us, or send us, more importantly, some pictures of when you experienced this insight, which context, who's with you, where are you, what are you consuming. This gives greater meaning to let's say, a validated insight to better understand also the context in which it is true. And in this R&D project, which was very much about chocolate and confectionery, we received some very, very, very good images which helped us understand the context in which this particular insight is identified with. A final way we thought to actually add value to this stage was why not have these consumers that are already validating your insights go a little bit to the next step. Let them have a chance to suggest ideas or solutions to the insight. So this is again a task that can happen at the end of a insight validation project to ask them to ideate. And from this, per insight, per country, we received anything up to 50 ideas coming from these consumers. And the quality of these were actually surprisingly good from what we received, which is already a great start for the innovation process going beyond that. So to wrap up this section, we believe that insight validation is a necessary step. It's a step that's not always taken by companies, but it should be for the reasons I outlined. And if we do insight validation, it should be a valuable piece of research, not just give you green and red lights, but help you fully understand the whys behind that. Okay, we've reached our final pillar, but not the least important, and that's about insight activation. So what we want to instill in you today is an idea that just finding and validating consumer insights, it's just not enough. In today's business, we need to move to a permanent state of insight activation. This is on screen now. What you see is a research study with clients and with stakeholders where they identified problems or issues with research or so forth. And one of the, if you read a couple of the quotes, they do relate to one of the key issues, which is that insights are not getting impact in the business. For example, these insights are interesting, but we tend to forget them. It's not in our routines. Interesting finding, but how will this insight change my business? So this touches on a very, very important issue, which is that without activating insights, they're useless in their own. So what is our challenge? Our challenge is basically to get those insights out of PowerPoint slides, to get them out into the company, get them immersed into the different, or to have different employees, stakeholders within the business truly immersed in these insights to understand what they're about and, more importantly, how potent they can be for the business. Now, there are some very obvious ways to do this in terms of reporting on inciting projects, and many of you are probably doing some of these already. For example, you may have infographic ways of presenting insights. You may even print out booklets using images and quotes, or you may do some kind of closing workshops so that people can understand the insight results. Great. All of this is great and should be done. We wanted to also, though, today give you a couple more examples of taking it even further. So maybe just let's say another kind of challenge to you is that why not start a meeting or a key meeting, a brand meeting, a category meeting? Why not start it with, let's revisit a great consumer insight and story, just to remind everybody, okay, that was something powerful that we discovered, and that's something that we know about our target consumer. Another way to, let's say, make insights live in the organization is by making it even more visual. So, for example, in a case we did for Diesel, this was a case to help them improve their Pinterest page with the relevant content which would inspire people to visit and repin in the Diesel page. The insights we discovered led to certain preferences on content and visual aspects. So an actual art type exhibition was created to be able to internal stakeholders to experience the insights or what the insights lead to. So this is one example of taking it further. Another example from right here in Belgium is an inciting project done with De Lijn, which is the local bus or local transportation company here in Flanders in Belgium, was to do a speed dating session with consumers. So here what happened is that the key stakeholders in the business were invited to a session where they got a few minutes with a selection of consumers one by one where they could discuss these insights and ask them more questions. Tell me your take on this insight. Help me understand it. So this idea of a one-to-one interaction with real consumers to discuss the insights was considered very, very fresh and original for the stakeholders at De Lijn. And one case to finish off on is a project we recently finished with Ad-hoc. For those who are not familiar with Ad-hoc, basically making kitchen appliances and machinery, but very much following a kind of a B2B model in terms of products designed around features and specs and power of ovens and power of fans. They did a major insighting project to understand consumers, how they cook, how do they approach cooking. And this led to the generation of different profiles of consumer cooks based on the way that they cook. And the challenge was now to introduce into the company an idea that we should design our products and services around the different consumer cooking styles as opposed to typical product specifications. But this required a lot of buy-in internally and a lot of people understanding this direction. So what did they do? They let the whole company discover this new world of consumer cooking or consumer cooking profiles that they had uncovered in the incitement phase. Two aspects I want to focus on. At the end of the research, they created an internal community which was designed completely for internal people to discover these insights, the background of these insights, where they come from and how do we activate them, which was extremely well received internally and helping to drive buy-in with the new direction they were taking. A second aspect for such a business is that Ad-hoc products and services are obviously sold through the retail chains, through kitchen sellers and third parties. So what they did was even go out to these third parties and train them and let them experience the insights. Very practical way was they got to cook the different ways that the different types of consumers segments cooked. So they could feel the passion, understand the difference between the different segments. And this helped them to, let's say, understand and believe in the insights. We also believe very strongly in the need for this idea of activating insights. Just to give you a kind of a preview is that we have an R&D project coming up on consumer activation. What will it be? Well, essentially it will be about helping clients in a digital way and an offline way achieve this final phase where insights can become an inspiration, where employees can build on insights by creating already ideas, enriching insight platforms in a visual and an inspiring way for our companies, both digitally and offline. So please watch this space. That's something that we will have more details on very soon. So we've reached the end of the webinar, but like all good circles, we should come back to the circle. So we would like to ask you, how is your circle looking? Take a critical look at these 5 pillars we've introduced today, and several questions. Is there one activity or area which you're not even doing at all at the moment? Alternatively, there might be one area which you're doing, but you think, okay, maybe we're not doing it in a robust way or a correct way. And finally, out of all that, what is your concrete action that you'd like to take to improve the collection and activation of insights in your organization? Before we hand over to questions, we'd just like to say to you that for both of us, we want this to be the beginning of a conversation. We've given you a lot of information today. We don't propose to answer all the questions, but we would like to engage with you, connect with us on LinkedIn, contact us to talk about your inciting issues in your organization, or challenges, or even, let's say, inspirational examples that you have of how maybe you've done some of the virtuous circle. We'd really love to continue this discussion. But for now, I believe it's time that we will try to cover some of the questions that have come up either before or now.
All right. Thank you very much, Martijn and Ashley, for sharing this story with us and this beautiful model. A lot of questions already have been come true. Let me go to the first one. One from Eileen. What online tools do you use in an ethnography project?
Okay. Well, an ethnography project will use some technology. I will admit that I am not let's say, the expert in the technology tools involved, but it does involve software or programs which can actually collect the blogs and the postings. Then it also helps to analyze it a little bit. And the final step is that we do bring in qualitative researchers. That's very important. Qualitative researchers then have to look at the outcome and actually turn them into insights. So it's actually a combination of using, let's say, technology providers that can collect all of the online digital information, and then added the layer of a normal qualitative researcher to actually then turn them into insights.
Thank you, Ashley. And next question from
and just sorry to before I go on to that, we obviously we partner with people who can do that. So normally in a project like that, we would be able to arrange the data collection and the analysis. Yeah. Sorry, Natalie.
No problem. Next question from Tom. He says, I can see an insight guides and inspires an idea, but should every concept start with an insight, or should it just begin with an idea or a benefit?
Well, yeah, this is a very old discussion. I know it's something that people have very strong opinions on either way. I'm not here to say that there's never been a concept or an idea that's been born that didn't really come from a strong consumer need, or one that we knew that didn't succeed in the market. I'm sure there's been cases. I think our let's say viewpoint on this is that by rooting all ideas or concepts in great consumer insights, is that you dramatically increase the chances that your new product or service will succeed in the market. Also, that you don't spend as much time testing or prototyping concepts or ideas that may fail, which is an expensive activity. But I'm not here today to say that it's never possible to come with a great idea or concept that is, let's say, born from intuition or inspiration internally. That can certainly happen. What we're talking about again is a virtuous process, and we just believe that anything that's grounded in a great consumer insight has a much greater chance of leading to a successful innovation.
I hope this was a clear answer for you, Tom. I have another interesting one from Tessa about the reporting. What about all the details from an insight? How do you present the final delivery of the details and the insights to the clients?
I guess we're not talking about the social media anymore, right? We're talking about just in general how we present insight findings, right? Yeah. I think it also depends on which stage of the virtuous circle that you're in. So that's something maybe we can talk about offline. But I think what's really important in presenting any kind of insight is that obviously the text and the insight is important, but we really need to do whatever we can to present the supporting contextual information around it, the images which we think represent that insight in action, the quotes we think that led to that insight. So, for example, if we ever run workshops on writing insights, we always believe in what we call like insight museums, where each insight has like a kind of a background story to it. It has pictures of people and contexts and so forth. So again, it's about bringing that insight to life in a way which is digestible and boosts credibility and buy-in with your key stakeholders. So, but I think the different stages of the circle we've discussed may actually then require different concrete outputs. But happy to discuss that offline.
Yes, thanks, Ashley. And as Ashley said, if that's not a clear answer to your questions, you can always contact him afterwards as well. We have just another one from Jeremy. His question is, how do you generate and deliver your own insights within the company? As I assume it is less research-led and more about encompassing the everyday insights. Do you still go through all the other phases as formally?
I think Jeremy's question is relating to if people within the business, like we've been touching on, like employees, etc., may be able to make a valid contribution here. If that's the case, I think there's not such a strict process indeed here. It's about that this is not always happening well to start with, that we are not always tapping into the power of employees, especially frontline employees, to contribute here. So I think what I'm saying is that firstly, doing this is a great idea. Is there a perfect way to do that? Not necessarily, but I think that any activity to involve, well, you've seen, for example, in the KBC example, you mean, okay, I'm reading your comment. How do we do this? How do we do this? Are we practicing what we preach? Absolutely. When we gather together regularly for, let's say, we have our own, of course, R&D sessions, we have our own workshopping, is that it's very much about, we even try to, when we present reports to each other internally, we actually even try to frame it in the terms of what is the consumer insight here on the topic or the theme. So yes, we do that. We try to get together and share knowledge as much as we can about what each other is working on. But I will be honest with you, as a company, we can also still do a better job here. We can share more often what we are working on different projects, which is a way of us sharing insights and ideas. But yes, we do it at Insights, but I believe we can do an even better job ourselves on that. Yep.
Thanks, Ashley, for answering this question. I can see we are running out of time, but again, it's only the beginning. It's the start of a conversation. So if you have any additional questions or feedback, you can always contact us or Martijn and Ashley in person. Their contact details are on the slides. You will receive the recording of the session afterwards as well, both with the slides of the presentation. So I hope you enjoyed the session and hope to see you later in another one. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.